uncensored, unexpurgated, and unapologetic. It's the Cary Harrison Files.
Cary Harrison Files. Cary Harrison with you. Welcome to the brand new iteration. What used to be called Rethinking Heroes is now the Cary Harrison Files. We've been able to expand the grid and have Tom Hartman go Monday through Friday, which is awesome. And now we're doing this, and this allows us to go deeper than ever because we're not limited by certain formats. So this is going to be wild and woolly, great explorations into that which plagues you, questions you've had, and questions that now can be answered and looked at with a deep dive, continuing the live calls and all the good stuff that makes radio fun again. Mafa. I'm not sure. Let's turn our attention for a moment to the latest spectacle of modern governance. That would be the ascension of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to the National Institutes of Health, flanked by a CDC director whose views seem to have been drawn from the more fevered corners of a 19th century medical almanac. The scientific community, those poor wretches still clinging to their microscopes and reason, are watching with the same dread that someone reserves for train derailing in slow motion. Kennedy, of course, is a man whose crusade against vaccines is as famous as his surname. And under his watch, we can imagine a return to the golden days of iron lungs, smallpox scars, funeral parlors, bustling with a brisk business. It's hard not to be sarcastic because we're living in a truly surreal moment. A world where HIV meds are tossed out like last week's meatloaf, leaving the virus to mutate into ever more creative and catastrophic strains. A world where the pause button is hit on infectious disease research, because why study science when you can replace it with a fistful of conspiracy pamphlets and a well-placed enema of industrial strength disinfectant? Now, if I were just making that up, it would be clever, but I'm just looking back 4 years. Let's not forget the role of Washington's favorite strongman in all of this, the president in waiting, that great patron of fast food and fiscal ruin, a man who will not hesitate to wield his mighty funding axe, dangling federal dollars over the heads of states like a butcher sizing up a size of beef. California, for example, insists on keeping its school children vaccinated, a quaint notion to be sure, but what happens when federal funds are yanked away in the name of medical freedom and a new dark age of contagion is upon us? Please reread Orwell's 1984, reread Animal Farm, reread Huxley's Brave New World. It's all there, presaged decades ago, and here we are today, including monitoring devices known as your phone. And of course, if you have a webcam and you leave it plugged in all the time. Meanwhile, as if the gods themselves wish to test our capacity for calamity, we have a bird flu outbreak in California. Just a little something extra for those of us still invested in the notion of breathable air. With the state's sprawling dairy farms and underpaid workers, disease control is already hanging by a thread. Frequent testing? That requires resources. Resources require money, and money in the hands of this new administration is reserved for more pressing matters like tax cuts for billionaires and reanimating the corpse of trickle-down economics. So the question before us, my dear friends, is simple. How do we safeguard public health when our institutions are led by men who view science as a mere suggestion rather than the one thing keeping us all upright and glued to the surface of the planet? How do we ensure that the fate of 380 million people isn't left in the hands of a man whose most distinguished credential is a last name and an allergy to game fish? The stakes are nothing less than life itself. With us is a leading voice in the fight against scientific disinformation. As a co-founder of the Council for Quality Health Communication, Scott Ratson has been at the forefront of efforts to mobilize public health experts, combat the growing threat of misinformation. Recent appearances on CNN and other mainstream media. He holds multiple degrees from esteemed institutions, including USC, Harvard, Emerson, and serves as an adjunct professor at several top universities. Dr. Scott Ratson, we are glad to have you on the Harry. Yes, as you can see, I'm dyslexic. That won't be treated either. On the Cary Harrison Files.
Great to be here today, Cary. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. And we really need an adult in the middle of the room here because there are so many moving parts and it seems so impossible. So, you being a doctor, should the American people be concerned about Bobby Kennedy's views on immunization practices, for instance?
Well, I mean, again, you gave a great introduction here, and clearly there are huge challenges historically that have been amongst us, but now they're coming to the fray with, as you're suggesting, with RFK Jr.'s nomination and potential to lead Health and Human Services. But your question is should we all be worried? I think at the same time, we have to take health in our own hands, and that's a lot of what we've been working for some time is to help educate the American public about the importance of health, the importance of decisions they can make for themselves, and how to discern fact from fiction. But as we know, it's very difficult today in a world where, whether you want to call it misinformation, alternative facts, or just frankly information that's wrong. Scientists have been studying so many things for so long, and we know that there's settled science and there's also opportunities for incremental gains in science. So lots of what you laid out at the beginning, we could go and talk about that as you like here today.
I was thinking about that famous moment. We were all watching it on TV because we were always watching the updates connected to, and I don't say the word because the bots and the algorithms will kill the show if we do the C word. That happened some years ago. And we were told by the commander in chief to fire some bleach up the bum and other things, inject it into the veins. Now, the problem with that, apart from just medically, it would be, I think, in your world, contraindicated. Apart from that little issue, is that this is the most powerful man, we think, coming from the United States, in the world. This is the guy who has access to the greatest minds that ever existed, can summon the most brilliant people to his dinner table night after night. If he says it as the president, it must be true. And it's because we believe that. It's part of our belief system. So when we hear this kind of medical information, especially if Fauci is sitting in the corner and doesn't stand up and say, wait a minute. And I don't blame him. I mean, it's his boss. These are the conundrums I think a lot of us face is we don't have the critical thinking or we don't have anyone to confirm our critical thinking at this point. Where do we go? What do we do?
Absolutely. It's a huge challenge. And you're right in mentioning it's now 5 years this week, actually, when COVID was really beginning to spread in the United States. Then it was called SARS-CoV-2. And what you're referring to was a press conference that we had day by day updates from the commander in chief to talk about health issues. And when he mentioned hydroxychloroquine and why don't we put bleach in, he looked over at his medical advisor, Deborah Birx, a physician, and she didn't say anything. She had, some nonverbals, but we didn't set the record straight quickly. Unfortunately, some people actually tried that. But you're right on the president of the United States having a bully pulpit, and clearly not only summoning people to dinners as you're suggesting, but also having the share of voice there followed and into the historical record. So we have to do our best to what we would call either health literacy at our elected officials. I personally am a believer that government is a force of good. I mean, we've had all the progress from the National Institutes of Health. That's government money that we've been spending rightfully with tax dollars to get cures for certain cancers, to get advances with vaccination, to even the identification of a vaccine candidate and actually bringing a vaccine to market. It wasn't the private sector that did that. It was benchmark NIH research that we've been paying for decades. So we need to continue, one, the research, two, the application of it, and three, communicate to the public the reality so they're actually following facts and not fiction and going to get the information from places of people whom they can trust. Some are their personal doctors. Some could be a city or state or county or national authority. Or it also could be, even in many cases, global authorities that have more information than we might, even locally here in Los Angeles.
I appreciate your advocacy and what you're doing as a doctor. I respect doctors. I need a doctor. we all need a doctor, and that we're even debating, is science good or bad? Should we? I mean, it's insane that we're having that we need to have this conversation. If we were in Switzerland or Germany or Denmark or France or even England or Canada, we would not be having this conversation. We'd be talking about what we're going to have for lunch. But this is like literally a headline right now, and that we have to even defend the idea of gravity, science, molecules, all of that is just completely nuts. But thankfully, you're there to do that. We're talking right now to Dr. Scott Ratson, leading voice in the fight against scientific disinformation, co-founder of the Council for Quality Health Communication. He's been at the forefront of efforts to mobilize public health experts and combat the growing threat of scientific and medical misinformation. And it's not just happening on its own because suddenly everyone forgot that we sit in a chair because gravity's pulling us down. It's that we're supposed to unbelieve that, disbelieve that, and move on to a whole different reality where everything can happen on the side and you no longer can trust your senses or even your basic education. He holds multiple degrees from USC, from Harvard, from Emerson, among many others, and is also an adjunct professor doing what we're doing right here on the radio, but doing it one-to-one with people who will walk away with that knowledge. And are your students querulous? Are they curious? Like, oh, I didn't know that. Or they're like, thank God somebody is like, saying it's true.
Thanks. I'm a professor at the City University of New York Graduate School of Public Health and Health Policy. And we actually have a course, Advancing Quality Health Information. We teach it fully online, and managing editor of my Journal of Health Communication, which I've been editing for 30 years. Lauren Swan-Potras works on this with me. And we engage students to help understand, what is quality health information and how do we get there? And Cary, you gave a great point of what's being done in schools. So I grew up in Southern California in Los Angeles County, and at least many years ago, I don't know if we still do, we used to have a state test at seventh grade. You had to pass a Constitution test. Everybody in the state, simple pieces, do you know the Bill of Rights when they were written in 1789, First Amendment, some of these pieces that were there. Some may be a little bit more in depth of the nature of Congress or what it might be. We don't have something similar for health or science. And the science and health literacy level in the United States is anywhere from the 5th to 6th grade level. We need to do better in schools. Finland has done this with media and health literacy. They had the best response during the COVID pandemic to people getting vaccinated, and also for preventative measures. We can do this in the United States. We can do this. It doesn't have to come from the federal level, a county, a city. All of us could begin to work at this from the school-based level and hope to make a difference. Frankly, we made some mistakes, if I can say that. We, the public health community, the education community, because we assume the vaccines are good. We know that polio's gone, basically, from the United States. Measles, for the most part, hadn't been seen. It was gone in 2000. Now it's coming back because people aren't getting vaccinated. But we're having a loss of what we already knew, right? We never talked about pasteurized milk for a while. Now you mentioned bird flu in your intro.
Yeah.
People shouldn't be having non-pasteurized milk, also known as raw milk, because the potential of catching a human variant of bird flu. But we forgot to talk about pasteurization for all these years. We forgot to talk about the importance of fluoridation in the water, what it means if you're growing up in Los Angeles, that you're less apt to get cavities than you may have 50 years ago before there was fluoridation, and so forth. So a lot of it is the public health community has to do better. The education community has to do better. And even, frankly, those of us in media, when we talk about things, there's not two sides to everything. If there's settled science, we don't need to keep debating it. There's no link between a measles vaccine and autism. But RFK Jr. puts it out there and people talk about it. We've got to try to settle science and move on.
It reminds me of Copernicus or just really anybody throughout history, just cut off their head or roll them down a hill if they say the earth is round when we all know it's flat, or we all wish it to be flat because it's convenient for somebody somewhere who holds the reins. You mentioned bird flu in California. We have the largest amount of dairy farms in the entire nation. How might it impact human health if we do just look the other way?
Well, unfortunately, already the current administration, the Trump administration, has cut off communication. They're not letting anyone except for the Health and Human Service put information out. This week, there was supposed to be an update from the CDC on the bird flu outbreak. That is how then state veterinarians follow. That's how doctors make decisions. So it's been frozen. Months ago, or last year, the CDC gave extra money to the state of California to get workers on poultry as well as dairy farms vaccinated for flu, because you need a flu vaccination to also, while it might not prevent bird flu, it prevents the possibility, if you do get bird flu, of bird flu mutating and becoming human to human. We're losing all these opportunities by just putting blinders on, ostrich head in the sand, and think it's going to go away. We need to be prepared. We've been writing about that, last year in such publications as The Hill, which we would hope the Capitol Hill, they would listen. The CDC has done some work. The Biden administration did put some money potentially to have a vaccine if there would be a human outbreak. But right now we're in a communication vacuum. Having said that, the state of California and the state of New York, as you're mentioning, California bigger in terms of the ag, but similarly, I think New York is number 5 in dairy farms. Amongst them, they have their own CDCs and state labs. We're going to have to rely more on the states right now instead of the federal government, just as it's evolving and this transition to a new administration is taking place.
And the only way, Dr. Scott Ratson, that a state would be able to afford something that was, under the mantle of the federal government. We all pay taxes, by the way, to that same federal government. Right. That money is going somewhere, another conversation for another time, but it's not vanishing, evaporating into thin air. It's being up-funneled somewhere else. With that money, being gone, states are going to have to raise taxes. States like California, which are, people, it's tough. It's expensive. Red states, forget the taxes, so forget the help. This creates a terrible conundrum then, because you got to fix it. At some point, it's going to get so bad that everyone is going to have to show up whether they like it or not. But is the horse already out of the gate? When it's a pandemic, it's not a common cold. It's a terrible thing.
Well, look, I don't think the horse is out of the gate. Health is incremental. All of us still can make decisions that we can figure out ourselves, in some cases, exercise and physical activity, and those other pieces that are important, diet to ward off certain diseases, whether it be diabetes, hypertension, and so forth. We can also access medical care for prevention. Everybody should have their flu shot this year. It's not too late. But also there's other shots that we need to make sure that we have if your kid is going to school, that they have the full vaccine schedule, they're up to date. If you're an adult, not only the flu shot, but over a certain age, you should have a shingle shot and other pieces that we can do. And we can actually access that, whether at our physician or via a national pharmacy. The second piece we could do is the Affordable Care Act does aim and does have funding for everybody to have prevention, not only with vaccination, but also for appropriate checkups, whether it's your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your cholesterol. And then, of course, if it's elevated in a way that you discuss with your doctor, you can take measures, whether it's with medicine or with other dietary or other changes. So we have to get health back in our own hands, built our sort of personal health literacy. And we also need to have the organizations, both at a state-funded level, whether it's a Medicaid or Medicare Advantage or one of the other programs that exist, or even whether it's those people who are with Providence, with Kaiser, with any of the Blue Cross, any of the ones in the state that they have, that we need to have insurers that do a little bit better, as well as our employers. They will need to have a productive and healthy workforce. If you're going back to the office, while it might not be mandated, it's good practice to have a vaccinated population so you don't have an outbreak of flu, even amongst a small number where you have absenteeism. So we all have a role in this. And so how do we get everybody to do that together? That's a challenge, especially when there's all the pieces that you're saying. There's taxation, there's costs, there's busy things that we need to do, and notwithstanding mental health and other areas too, Cary. So, there's so much to do and think about, and we shouldn't be derailed solely by what's going on in Washington today. We could still be doing things on the local and personal level.
Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. We're talking right now to Dr. Scott Ratson. He's a leading voice in the fight against scientific disinformation, co-founder for the Council for Quality Health Communication, been at the forefront of efforts to mobilize public health experts and combat the growing threat of scientific and medical misinformation, holding multiple degrees from USC, Harvard, Emerson, among others. And we're talking about, I guess, the fact that we're in many ways at the self-serve pump when it comes to medicine in the United States of America, e pluribus unum. This may as well be 150 years ago when my grandmother grew up on the farm. What can she do? Eat an apple a day to keep fill in the blank away. But this medical literacy does mean a certain personal accountability that many of us never thought we would have to have. So in some ways, it does mean seriously losing weight and doing other things where we know that personal choices can modify sickness. You can avoid potentially certain diabetic conditions if maybe you drop 30, 40, 50 pounds. We know this stuff. It's available. You can look it up on the internet. Your doctor will probably tell you the same. So it's sort of a call to action, I think, for an unwanted personal responsibility and real lifestyle changes at the same time. I'm trying to find a silver lining here, Dr. Ratson.
Sure.
But I think good choices is probably good, whether times are good or times are bad.
Absolutely. And while you're using the word medical, we think of medical when we're a patient. We also live in a world, we want better health, we want better well-being, right? So there's self-care. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we go for that 30-minute walk a day or get the 10,000 steps that we might aim for, if you believe that's the magic number? And many of us are a little bit more engaged where we're going to wear wearables to monitor us, whether it's for our sleep, whether it's our daily patterns of exercise. So I think the more we do and the more we bring technology into our lives to both understand what it works for our health and also help make choices about the better foods, that's also another area to consider, and not to overly medicalize everything. A lot of work we do is focused on getting people to understand prevention, and prevention, as you mentioned with your whoever was the apple a day to keep the doctor away. Those old aphorisms, whether it's Ben Franklin or others, they actually have some relevance and truth. We don't have to go ahead and continue to prove the negative. We know that fruits and vegetables are better than ultra processed foods. There's a lot of things that we can do and simplify this in a health literate way. And I say we both the medical community, the communication community, media, education, throughout society, and we need to think differently and hopefully work along on this in the future with people such as yourselves and others, even highlighting the challenges we face.
You are a glass of cool water in a parched desert of freak out at the moment. I really appreciate you reminding us that there are things that we can do individually. We're not just victims of somebody else above us making bad choices, that there are a ton of things we can do to just mitigate potential damage and actually remain healthy no matter what decisions are made. That's such a critical reminder, and I'm glad to hear it myself. One final question. Doctors all over the U.S., they can't be loving this. It's like being a roller skater and them taking away everyone's roller skates. It's like, but it's the tools of my trade. Are you guys getting together and talking? Is there, not that there's a plan, but there's definitely an ambition to fix this thing. And I would think you as doctors in an aggregate sense have sufficient power to move the needle in some way, or at least we hope so.
Well, thanks for raising that. I mean, there is a coalition for trust in health and science where many of the medical associations, I think there's over 90 that are engaged in our councils, one of those members. Dr. Reed Tuckson leads that. They're hoping to get a louder voice. 15,000 doctors sent signatures in a petition to Congress. At least I believe that's how many had signed against RFK Jr.'s nomination. 75 Nobel laureates have signed why they're worried about both scientific progress and NIH also. So doctors are trying to mobilize, but having said that, organized medicine may be engaged on lobbying efforts and other pieces. Ultimately, the people we trust most. And this is survey after survey. If you ask, where do you want to get your health information? People trust their own doctor. So we have to give their own doctor the best information that's up to date. They're not going to always be able to go to the CDC each day. They'll get something from the California Medical Association, maybe even the LA County Association. They'll get updates of what's happening if there is a flu outbreak or other issues on infectious disease. So we have to make sure we give those doctors that information. And then the flip side is, you're saying, why are people frustrated? Yes, doctors you'd go for a well child visit, as we called it, and what vaccines do I get today? That's what a mom or dad would ask. Now, instead of just what vaccines do I get, why do I need those vaccines today? And the pediatrician, in many cases, has to sit down and explain. They don't always have the time. They're not reimbursed for it. It gets to be more difficult. And we start to have the waning of, in this case, vaccine confidence. And then that begins to trickle down to challenges with vaccine preventable diseases. Similarly, I think we can find that happening if we don't have the support that we expect from Washington with the NIH, support for Medicaid programs, and support for programs at all level, not only in California, but even locally. We need to really work on that.
Well, I appreciate your coming on today, and I know it's a soothing emollient to people's freaked out soul that there really are still lots of high functioning people in this country, lots of great eyeballs looking at the problem and devoted to fixing this before it careens too wildly out of control. And until we hear voices like yours, we cannot know that you exist. So thank you for showing up at your own peril to some degree. We know this. These are acts of bravery and a reminder to the rest of us that we have to suit up and show up for ourselves and each other in order to make a difference. So I appreciate you coming on today, Dr. Scott Ratson.
Well, thank you, Cary. We do want to advance this quality health information and appreciate the opportunity to do that with you today in Los Angeles.
All right, my friend. Dr. Scott Ratson, leading voice in the fight against scientific disinformation, co-founder of the Council for Quality Health Communication. He's been at the forefront of efforts to mobilize public health experts and combat the growing threat of scientific and medical misinformation. I know. What a weird word to put next to medical. It's like medical misinformation. He holds multiple degrees from USC, from Harvard, from Emerson, among many others. Cary Harrison with you. Coming up, bingo for billionaires. By the way, if you have a modern device, which you do, we are live streaming on all video channels. Simply go to, or just Google Cary Harrison and whatever it is, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We have a live channel right there, and you'll be able to watch this. So if you get out of your car because you're driving, you can continue on your phone and watch us live. Instagram is definitely a cool place to do it. Also, you can sign up for our free newsletter, no longer at rethinkingheroes.com, but at caryharrison.com, CaryHarrison.com. Go to caryharrison.com, get a free copy of our newsletter. Plus, we're going to have archives of all the other shows that we used to do, plus all the new ones coming up and things that we simply cannot do on the radio, especially since the FCC has announced that they are coming after public radio. That was yesterday. New York Times, Crosshairs, all of us. How long are we going to be here? We don't know. So that's why I want to have you stay connected. Go to caryharrison.com. Sign up for the free newsletter, stay in the loop so that we can still communicate if that kind of stuff gets cut. Like I said, coming up, billionaires, bingo for billionaires, freezing federal funds like hitting the pause button on a Spotify song. Congress decides where the money goes, not the White House. At least that's in the Constitution. Can our Constitution still stand on its own leg with a torn crotch? Well, our next guest is going to bring the perfect insight.
Listen while it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files. This is the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
The Cary Harrison Files. Cary Harrison with you, your new best friend. Welcome to this new time slot as we have moved and expanded everything on the station. I brought Bobby Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., onto KPFK, our mothership station here, a number of years ago. I think it's about 10 years ago, through a show. And he was on the side of clean water and air and really championing things that are valuable to most people, and then had a sudden change of heart. Obviously, it's hard to get real fans when you're somewhere on the center of things. People just go, well, you're supposed to do that. You're supposed to not pollute the water, so you don't get applause for doing the right thing. But some of us have larger appetites. And when the fan base is on the other side, where you can do the opposite, the inverse, and tell them it's good, like Orwell, war is peace, up is down, cold is hot, it really works. And you suddenly get a giant fan base and you get escalated up into a world of madness. So while I did bring him on, those were the good days. I cannot take responsibility for what's happening today. Well, I want to welcome me, you, everyone else to a world of political theater that is so absurd, so drenched in double dealing and bureaucratic bungling that it'd be comical if it weren't so catastrophic. The latest act in this tragic farce, the Trump administration, in its infinite wisdom, issued and then rescinded a sweeping order to freeze federal funds, throwing the country into a panic and leaving the states scrambling to access basic programs like Medicaid and Head Start. The White House memo, and it was done through a memo, kooky as it was audacious. It amounted to a government shutdown by decree, which is, by the way, illegal. Remember, we left the King of England. There would never be such a decree. There could never be with a balance of power. But there was a decree. While it was illegal, while it was unconstitutional, it certainly worked, at least a little bit. And if we're being honest, it's wholly predictable. Yet, despite this memo's hasty retraction, they did unpause it. That's because the court stepped in. The damage still has been done, and that's the problem. The administration still clings to its broader mission to withhold funding from anything it deems a threat to its ideological purity, whether that's so-called Marxist equity or transgender rights. I mean, there's transgenders on every corner. They're in your room probably right now, right? It's just the worst. I mean, please. How about FEMA? FEMA disaster aid for the wrong sorts of people. That's been stopped. Or the dreaded windmill on some farmland when a beautiful oil derrick would glow like a reflecting rainbow at sunset. Meanwhile, the American taxpayer, you and me, that much abused beast of burden, is left bewildered, exhausted, uncertain about which services are going to exist tomorrow and which are going to be yanked out from underfoot like a cheap carnival rug. Poor grandma, stripped of her Social Security, which she paid into for 7 decades, and maybe relegated to eating little Friskies from the 99-cent store. You think she feels bait and switched? Joining us now is Karen Dolan, director of the Criminalization of Race and Poverty program at the Institute for Policy Studies. She's been watching the reckless gambit unfold in real time, and she warns us this isn't just incompetence. It's a calculated effort to cause chaos, keeping the public too disoriented to be able to fight back as their hard-earned tax dollars are funneled into the pockets of billionaires. I know, it's real. It's today. It's now. Karen Dolan, welcome to the Cary Harrison Files.
Thank you so much, Cary.
And thank you for doing what you do. I was just saying to Dr. Scott Ratson minutes earlier, these are acts of bravery. A month ago, maybe not. Today, right now, acts of bravery. Anybody who stands up, even slightly resistant to this stuff, has crosshairs painted on their back. That would be you. Let's talk for a second about this memo. I'm sending a memo for the White House to freeze funding that another branch of government decided. Was it sheer incompetence or a deliberate attempt to stoke confusion and fear?
I think it was both. The memo was very poorly and vaguely written. I think that the incompetence behind that was quite clear, but it did achieve its objective, which was to sow chaos and confusion. The way it was written in such vague and sweeping terms made it sound as if nearly every government program on the discretionary side of the side of the budget that Congress approves funding for, was at risk.
So even though the freeze was rescinded, which it was, they backpedaled and said, "Oops, just kidding." What dangers still loom for American families?
Yeah, I think it's important to sort of dig into that a little bit. So the initial memo said, "Hey, we're freezing everything," and there was a list with 2,600 programs that were potentially on the chopping block, that have to report if they comport with Donald Trump's vision of a white supremacist society. And there was a footnote in the memo, a small footnote in small letters, that said that Medicaid and Social Security and programs that directly benefit individuals were exempt. But what directly benefit individuals means was undefined and is not a legal phrase. And so that potentially would sweep up everything. Then they issued a clarification, because panic was just widespread, not just, of course, with Democrats, but with Republicans, with everybody who receives any help from the government, which includes infrastructure and disaster aid and our roads and bridges and federal aviation control. And so the clarification was, well, it's just a certain number of programs. It's not all these programs that you're saying. The clarification was nonsensical. So immediately a lawsuit was launched, and a judge put a stay on that sweeping order until it could be figured out what they meant. And then immediately the White House press secretary put out a tweet that said, "Just kidding. We rescinded the memo, but we're not stopping the freeze." And so another judge stepped in and said, "That's not cute. That's not funny. That's dangerous." And on behalf of 22 states in the District of Columbia, he's issuing a stop action to prevent those funds from being frozen.
It's like being in the ICU and somebody pinching your tube, just pinching it so the liquid doesn't flow through for, I don't know, 20 seconds, and then undoing it and saying, "Just kidding." You
That's
could
right.
perish.
And that is what happened even with these programs that were supposedly exempt, like Medicare. All 50 states reported that during the time on Tuesday when this memo was in effect, that they were unable to access funds through the portals for Medicaid. And the same was reported for disruptions in Head Start, which is childcare, and food for seniors, and education, and after school programs. And across the board, the programs that were supposed to be exempt, in fact, the access to those much needed funds was disrupted during that day.
Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files, CaryHarrison.com. We're also live streaming on every video platform right now. Just Google Cary Harrison and up it will come, along with whatever your favorite streaming platform is. We'll also have archives. You can get our free newsletter at CaryHarrison.com, where you'll get a transcript of this conversation, other things that we cannot include or do on the radio while we're still allowed to be on the radio. I don't say that as an empty threat. We have been targeted specifically in Project 2025. This station targeted specifically and named. And as of yesterday with the New York Times, all public radio and PBS are in the crosshairs of them trying to figure out how to make it go away. All that to say, we're going to bring on the heroes, bring on the people who are brave, who are fighting to bring out information that you need critically, like Karen Dolan, who we're speaking to right now, director of the Criminalization of Race and Poverty program at the Institute for Policy Studies. And we're talking about the federal funding freeze and how it affects you and me. And she's warning this isn't just incompetence, it's a calculated effort to cause chaos, keeping the public too disoriented to fight back as their hard-earned tax dollars are funneled into the pockets of billionaires. Karen Dolan, let's go like 2 layers deeper. White supremacist nation, we all can sort of nod and go, yep, but what does that actually mean? Because there are people who are going to go, what's wrong with that? Well, there's plenty wrong with that because it becomes a monolithic society. What is wrong with that?
Well, I mean, on its face, a country that is only for white males with billions of dollars, and
It's a small lunch table.
yes, and wives and lots of children, would be an untenable society, and a society without a workable government, civil servants, and just regular families who are not billionaires. Of course, wouldn't work. So on the face of that's terrible. But really, if you look at the reality, the heroes are all of the American people because we will all be affected by shutting down government. So the programs that are still on the chopping block, and those include Social Security and Medicare, people should not be fooled. It isn't just through federal funding, it isn't just through executive order that Trump and the Republicans are trying to take away funding. It is through the budget, it is through funding the government. So all of these programs are on the chopping block, and we will all be affected. As I said, from disaster aid to transportation to healthcare to food to housing to education to everything that makes up our daily lives. That is all precariously at risk. And why? To free up money for tax cuts for Donald Trump, Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, and all the billionaires who want to line their pockets with our taxpayer dollars.
So just being an English major, not a math major. In fact, I have to hire people to do simple math for me. I don't think in terms of balancing with numbers, but this is a balancing act. If you're going to cut trillions in taxes, it has to be paid for by money from somewhere else. That money, if it's being spent on programs like Medicare, on Social Security, on people's retirement, on food for old ladies, on Band-Aids, medicine, FEMA, et cetera, you've got $1 trillion being spent for the public. You unspend it for the public, it balances the tax cuts you've just given your buddies, and basically it's a wash, except that people get hurt.
That's right. So the tax cuts are projected to cost about 5 trillion over the next 10 years, and they go overwhelmingly to the top 0.0001%. This is not you and me. This is not the people who think that they have, a couple of $1 million maybe net worth per year, or some retirement fund with a couple $1 million in it. They're not the ones who are going to benefit. It's the ultra rich, the uber rich. There's a big difference between $1 million and $1 billion. I'm not sure everybody understands that. And the only way you can get 5 trillion to pay for this is to cut virtually everything else. So there's no way you can get that money, even by cutting just all the programs that we rely on that's in the so-called discretionary budget that is approved every year by Congress. You have to also take from the mandatory budget, which is the Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So most of Americans rely on one or more, and usually several, of these programs. And to have them cut is incredibly destabilizing. And the only thing it does is help the very rich get richer, and the rest of us sicker and more suffering and more death.
Finally, Karen Dolan, how can we, citizens, listeners, viewers here on the Cary Harrison File, what can we do to cut through the noise and misinformation to understand what's really happening?
Make sure that your lawmaker, regardless if they're a Republican, a Democrat, or an independent, at all levels, at your local level, at your state level, at the federal level, know that you do not want these services cut. The cuts to these services across the board, Republican and Democrat, are hugely unpopular. It's like 80%. of American people do not want cuts to these programs. And they also, tax cuts for billionaires are exceedingly unpopular. So your lawmaker has to feel that pressure. Republican lawmakers also freaked out with the Trump memo on Tuesday, and that's part of the reason that they rescinded it, because Republican lawmakers also have people in their districts that rely on roads, bridges, health, housing, disaster aid, everything. Everybody relies on everything, so that it shouldn't be a partisan issue, but you have to make your voice heard. You must do that. And keep in mind, just because this memo was rescinded and there are some lawsuits temporarily staying the freeze, this is going to the Supreme Court. This is the purpose. The Trump administration is trying to take back the power from the legislative branch and vest it only into into his hands. Unconstitutional, illegal. Who knows what will happen at the Supreme Court with the kind of supermajority he has. So we have to stay vigilant, or we will lose what we know of as life at present.
I remember President Obama. This is back in the, it was another century, it feels like anyway. President Obama saying that, I can do what everyone wants, but I have to have your back. I can't just unilaterally declare that I'm going to do this. If you guys want it, I'll do it. But I have to have your back, or you have to have my back in order to do it. And I think with our politicians, at least the way our system is set up, whether it's blue or red or purple, it doesn't matter, is that these people are out there doing stuff, whether you like it or not. But if they think they have sufficient backing, they'll stand on their head, stand on their pinky, whatever, drive a Tesla, not drive a Tesla. It doesn't matter if they think that you have their back. So if we show up and suddenly really magnify our intention and our desires to even the crappiest of politicians, they work and exist and get paid at the pleasure of you and me, letting them think that they have our support. So let's go ahead and tell them what to do, even more than we ever have. Is there a shortcut to that, Karen Dolan, that you know about? Is with modern technology and digital, does it matter?
Well, I mean, you can go on to your local congresspeople's website to find their telephone number, and different organizations have ways that automatically send out letters. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head which one, because they're often, contained by different subject areas. But it isn't just one subject area that we need to talk about. We need to talk about all of them. And you need to write letters to your editor. You need to tell your neighbor, your family members, what's really happening. So a lot of people are just taking at face value that Trump is trying to streamline government. Streamlining government is getting rid of the civil service workers that make sure we get our Social Security checks, that make sure we have enough air traffic controllers in the booth so that collisions don't happen, that make sure that there are doctors to take care of us, that there are roads that we can drive on, that our children can go to school. When you defund that, you lose that. So people have to stop listening to the campaign rhetoric that somehow this administration has your back by streamlining government. It is not having your back when you destroy government and all of the programs that we rely on to be safe and happy and that our families and our children need. So we've got to cut through the confusion. We've got to cut through the BS, the campaign promises that are spoken in simple words to dupe people. Let's not be duped anymore. Let's understand what's at stake and say, no way.
Let's not be duped anymore. That's a great book title. I'm so grateful that you've been here today with us, Karen Dolan. You're director of the Criminalization of Race and Poverty program at the Institute for Policy Studies. And we've been talking about the federal funding freezes, and you're warning us that this isn't just incompetence, but a calculated effort to cause chaos, keeping us too disoriented to be able to fight back. But you just told us how to do that. Get back into action. Stuff that in the 1980s was normal, in the 1990s was normal. People did write their Congress people. People did reach out, and they were involved in civics. Here we are again, except this time it's existential. This time it really matters. It's not just a comfort, it's a literal survivability. What's your website so people can check you out, Karen?
ips-dc.org. And people should realize Congress people, even Republicans, take it seriously when their offices are flooded with letters and calls. They do take it seriously. We need to take our own civic responsibility seriously.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on today. I very much appreciate it. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. We're going to pause for a second, and then we're going to unpause, just like the Trump administration. When we return, we're going to open up the phones, be able to probably squeeze in a call or two at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. That's 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. I think you just press option 1 when you call in at 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. Your thoughts on this and workarounds that you know about, and should we get involved in our civics at this time of life or death? Cures, thoughts, solutions, whatever you've got in mind, I want to hear it here on the Cary Harrison Files.
This is the Cary Harrison Files. CaryHarrison.com.
Listen while it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files.
And it is the Cary Harrison Files. And I'm glad you're listening while it's still legal. It is still legal as of today. If you saw the New York Times yesterday and the day before, all public radio stations, that includes us, we here, including maybe some of our affiliates like K-Gay or KMEE in Palm Springs that are gay owned and operated. All of us are in the crosshairs right now. So hard to know how long legacy media will continue to be able to do its thing. So I want you to also get our free newsletter so we can stay connected and give you updates on what we learn is happening before it's published in things like newspapers days later, or they don't publish it because their advertisers won't like it. You can go to CaryHarrison.com, CaryHarrison, CaryHarrison.com. Sign up for our free newsletter, where we're also going to give you transcripts so you can read the conversations and absorb it as you would like an ebook, which is better than if you're able to listen only for 10 minutes at a time, but you can get the whole and absorb the whole show, because we've had 2 critical pieces of information brought out today, along with my favorite thing, solutions. Solutions matter. Let's go to the phones at 818-985-KPFK, 818-985-5735. Say hello to Joey. Joey, you're on the Cary Harrison Files. Hello, Joey. We can't hear you for some reason or another. We'll just put you on pause there. Wendell, unmute. Yes. Wendell in the control room. Please unmute.
Yeah.
Joey. There we go. I hear a voice.
Can you hear me? Yes,
Yes.
you can hear me. Yeah.
Yes.
So this whole RFK Jr. thing, it's so fucking American.
Oh, whoa.
So fucking American.
Thank you. Wendell, I'm sure you
I
caught
know
that.
that's right.
So watch your language, please. Okay, you're gone. It probably would have been good, but we do have to be careful because we still are a regulated entity, unlike regular streaming and regular cable. So what we're dealing with right now, of course, is an issue where all of us are feeling the pause and unpause of the freeze. This is the hors d'oeuvre at week number 2. The entree is yet to come. The key to this, and we knew this from Stalin, he referred to weeding the garden, which was removing services and basically purging millions of people that weren't, as the Germans pointed out, productive. So the German T4 problem, the German T4 problem during World War II, T4 for Tiergarten 4, was to get rid of people who the Germans said led burdensome lives. Why would you get rid of Medicare? Because who's on Medicare? People under the Trump administration, or the way they look at it, under the way that billionaires look at it, lead burdensome lives. In other words, they're not productive the way they would like people to be productive. They're not generating enough, so they actually need help from the government. This is why we have a government, by the way, so that we don't have massive homelessness. We have it massively, but not just everybody, so that we don't have people starving on the streets, or we don't have zombieism going on. So we do have these social services because it is true. Some of us, things happen, we get in a car accident, we can no longer function the way we once did, even weeks or months earlier. We do need help. That's what the services are for. You take them away because you declare that people are leading burdensome lives. It somehow seems like you're giving them a gift by just letting them self-exterminate. Why else would the Trump administration go on the CDC website and pull HIV meds, where 30 million people around the earth are taking HIV meds in one form or another to keep from spreading a rampant virus? You do that because you hope, if you're a billionaire, that they will simply self-exterminate. That's the plot of the play, and I want to leave you with that so you think about it and understand the reality of what's going on. Cary Harrison with you. This is the Cary Harrison Files. Don't forget to sign up for our free newsletter at caryharrison.com, where we're going to keep you informed in what we know, plus give you transcripts and archives of this show and everything else. Also, you'll be able to get video archives as well as audio archives. And I appreciate your joining me today. And I know we got some great information out. We will have more to come as we bravely face these challenges of the day and suit up and show up for you for as long as we can. I look forward to seeing you next week, and have a great day.
Listen while it's still legal.
The Cary Harrison Files.